On Stoicism Breath, we uncover a truth that is often hidden behind the mask of indifference. When you walk away from a narcissist, they don't cry, they don't beg, they don't admit that you were the most valuable person they ever had. Instead, they put on a show, they smile, they post pictures, they act as if you never existed. And in that moment, you may find yourself asking, was any of it ever real? They make you feel invisible, as if the love, the sacrifices, the unconditional forgiveness you gave were worthless. They make you question yourself, your kindness, your strength, your very sense of truth. But behind that polished, composed mask, cracks begin to form, because deep inside, they're beginning to realize that they've just lost the best thing that ever happened to them. And this realization doesn't come from gratitude or maturity. It comes from an emptiness they cannot fill. They once had you, the one who saw the deepest parts of them, the one who stayed when everyone else had walked away. And now with you no longer there to forgive, to heal, to endure, they are forced to confront something they never imagined. You are not replaceable. You are the standard, the one no one after you will ever measure up to. In this video, we dive deep into the emotional collapse of a narcissist when they are forced to face true loss. Not just because you left, but because for the first time in their life, they lost someone who loved them unconditionally, without control, without games, and without masks. The truth is, a narcissist doesn't realize you were the best thing they ever had, because they never learned how to recognize real value while it was in front of them. To them, love isn't sacred. It isn't a bond between two souls. It's a tool, a game, a mirror to reflect their ego. When you were by their side, loving them patiently, enduring their damage, trying to heal wounds, they refused to admit you weren't seen as extraordinary. To them, it was expected. It was your duty. Deep down, they believed they were entitled to your emotional service, no matter how many times they hurt you. They mistook your forgiveness for weakness, your kindness for dependency, your unconditional love for lack of self-worth. They only saw what you did, never why you did it. They couldn't understand that true love is a courageous choice, not a naive mistake. And most of all, they couldn't grasp that no one ever again will love them the way you did. Your steady presence was nothing short of a miracle, but they were far too emotionally immature to recognize it. On Stoicism Breath, we step into the fragile illusion a narcissist builds and what happens when it shatters. In their mind, you would always be there. You'd always come back, always need them. They lived in a delusion where power was theirs, where you would never be strong enough to truly leave. Because of that, they never thought they had to change. They never felt the need to be grateful, and they never feared losing you. The more you endured, the more they dismissed your worth. The more you stayed silent to keep the peace, the more they weaponized that silence. They couldn't see the difference between gentleness and greatness. They never understood that you stayed not out of fear, but out of love. And so in their eyes, you were never special. You became background scenery in the performance they staged, never the lead character, until one day you quietly walked away. No accusations, no bitterness, just absence. And that silence carried more weight than all the words you ever spoke. That's when their illusion began to crumble. Not because they missed you in the way healthy love misses someone, but because they couldn't comprehend how someone who once loved them so deeply could vanish without even looking back. After you left, they didn't fall apart in tears or confession. Instead, they performed. They projected an image of perfection, smiling, laughing, telling others you weren't special, that the relationship was just another closed chapter, that you were too emotional or too dramatic. But all of that was a mask, a desperate performance to cling to psychological control. What they couldn't hide, not from others and not even from themselves, was the emptiness growing inside. a void they didn't know how to name. Narcissists don't have the emotional framework to process true loss. They don't understand genuine regret. They can't bring themselves to say, I messed up, I lost someone incredible. But deep in their subconscious, something begins to crack. They start thinking about you. Not the real you, but the role you played in their life, the one who calmed their storms, who mirrored their worth, who loved without conditions. And now your silence has stripped all of that away. They reread old messages. They watch your online presence. They search for signs you still care. And when they find nothing, panic begins to set in. Not because you are in pain, but because you're not. You are living, you are healing, you are thriving without them. And that is the deepest threat to their fragile ego. In their confusion, they may start to bait you again. Vague texts, cryptic posts, questions sent through mutual friends. But when you stay silent, when you don't respond, that silence becomes the loudest message you have ever spoken. Because silence from someone who once forgave, once gave everything, once loved that deeply isn't avoidance. It is a bold declaration. I have seen the truth and I choose to let go. On Stoicism Breath, we enter the moment where silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. When you stop responding, their confident mask begins to crumble. The performance they put on, smiles, laughter, pretending you never mattered, starts to strain. And in that silence, they are forced to face the question they've avoided their entire lives. Did I just lose the one person who truly cared for me? This is where fear of losing control slowly transforms into obsession. The haunting realization arrives far too late that you were the only one who ever saw who they really were beneath all the masks and still chose to love them. And now that love is gone, it doesn't come from someone mentioning your name. It doesn't come from conversations with friends. It comes from the prolonged silence, no reply, no return, no cracks left open for them to slip through. At first, they try to dismiss it with distorted logic. They're playing games. They'll come back. They always do. But as time passes, those illusions collapse and the truth rises undeniable. This time, you really left. And it's for good. The shock is devastating. A void opens up one no new relationship can fill. Yes, they may quickly cling to someone else just as they once clung to you. But the difference is glaring. The new person has boundaries. The new person sees through the facade. The new person doesn't make them feel special the way you did. And so the comparisons begin quiet but brutal. They remember how you looked at them without judgment, with genuine care. They remember how you stayed after their outbursts, not out of weakness, but because you still believed love could heal. They remember deep conversations, the warmth of your embrace, the way you made them feel like a real human being instead of a carefully polished performance. And that's when the truth lands. They lost the one person who saw their worth, even before they could see it themselves. But without true self-awareness, this realization doesn't lead to repentance. It doesn't inspire growth. It curdles into obsession, because a narcissist doesn't love in a healthy way. They don't love through freedom. They love through possession, through fear of abandonment. So when they realize you were the best thing they ever had, they don't grieve humbly. They want you back. Not because of who you are, but because of what you represented. You were proof of their worth. And now that you're gone, that illusion is gone too. That's why they will do everything in their power to pull you back in. Apologies, promises of change, even tears. But none of it is about love. It's desperation to escape the emptiness inside. And this is where your strength matters most. Because if you return too soon, the cycle begins again. The hunger for control will resurface and you'll lose yourself all over again. Only when you stand firm, when you walk away without looking back, will the narcissist finally be forced to confront the ruins they created. No one left to blame, no one left to manipulate, nothing left to prove, just one raw, undeniable truth. They lost the only person who ever saw the humanity in them and still chose to stay. On Stoicism Breath, we uncover the truth. The narcissist will never admit the obsession that haunts them is not your departure, but why you left. A narcissist can pretend they feel nothing. They may flaunt new relationships, parade exaggerated achievements, or act carefree as if you never existed. But beneath the surface is a truth too painful for them to face the loss of the only person who ever truly loved them. They don't cry the way you once did. They don't wrestle with longing the way you did. Yet this doesn't mean they feel nothing. In reality, they feel deeply, but their emotions are twisted by an oversized ego and a constant defense system. Instead of sadness, they feel humiliation. Instead of regret, they feel anger. And instead of taking responsibility, they shift blame. In their inner world, your departure isn't just a breakup, it's a collapse of their entire framework. You weren't just a partner, you were their mirror, the only reflection of the polished image they clung to so desperately. And now that mirror is shattered. They cannot replace what they lost because no one else will ever see them the way you did. No one else will look past their masks and still choose to stay. What hurts them most isn't just your absence, it's the memory that you once saw their darkest parts and still stood by them until they left you no choice but to walk away. That is something they will never forgive, not you, but themselves. They may move on with new relationships, but inside a silent wound, it keeps bleeding. It is the wound of unspoken regret, of memories they try to bury, but that return with force in the quiet of the night. When the spotlight is gone, when no audience remains, they face the question they cannot bear. Why did the one person who truly loved me have to leave? And deep down, they know the answer. They destroyed the best thing they ever had. Not because you weren't enough, but because they were never strong enough to deserve a love like yours. So they reach out in shallow ways, vague messages, nostalgic reminders, subtle tests, not to apologize sincerely, but to see if they still hold any power over you. That isn't love, it's desperation disguised as affection. But if you've grown strong, if you've stepped into the season where your heart no longer craves their validation, you see the truth they work so hard to bury. They are deeply wounded, but too proud to admit it. They may act as though you never mattered. Yet the truth remains, you were the greatest test of their life, and they failed. Not because you asked too much, but because they couldn't cherish what they never learned to value. And in that moment, you finally see it clearly. You were never the one who lost. You were the one who gave. And when your love wasn't honored, you were strong enough to take it back. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself. Even if they rush into a new relationship and appear happy on the surface, it is nothing more than a thin coat of paint covering a cracked foundation. Underneath, the wound still bleeds and the truth still haunts them. They destroyed the best thing they ever had. On Stoicism Breath, we reach the moment when the inevitable can no longer be denied comparison. At first, the narcissist convinces themselves that life is better now. They tell their new partner that you were too emotional, too demanding, too complicated, while this new person is easier, more agreeable, less challenging. But slowly, in scattered moments, the past begins to creep in. Quiet reminders surface, and they start to notice differences they cannot ignore. They remember the things you used to say, the questions no one else dared to ask. They recall how you could see through their forced smile and gently whisper, "Are you really okay?" They remember the times you chose silence, not as manipulation, but as a shield to protect your own heart from further harm. And they remember how you forgave them, not because you were weak, but because you still carried hope. And then standing beside someone new, the truth settles in. It isn't beauty that's missing. It isn't obedience or admiration. It's depth. The new person might listen, but they don't truly feel. They might admire, but they don't understand. Because only you, the one who loved them beyond the mask, ever truly could. And in that realization, the narcissist begins to taste something they despise above all else: loss. It feels like something intangible yet haunting has slipped through their fingers. A presence that once made them feel seen, understood, and even terrified because you touch the parts of them they worked so hard to hide. In desperation, they try to recreate the experience they had with you. They mimic the gestures that once made you smile. They replay the romantic scripts you used to believe in. But without you, everything feels hollow. Here lies the painful truth they will never admit out loud. To acknowledge that you were the only one who ever touched their soul would shatter their fragile ego beyond repair. So instead, they keep searching for you in others. But the harder they search, the clearer it becomes you cannot be replaced. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. You loved them in the middle of chaos. You embraced the human side they could never accept. You stayed not when it was easy, but when it hurt the most. And when you left, it wasn't out of weakness. It was because the pain became too heavy to carry. That's what makes you unforgettable. The one they admire, the one they resent, the one they can never forget. But now you are gone. You no longer seek validation from them. You no longer look to their eyes for answers. And that alone makes you untouchable, completely irreplaceable, because nothing can replace a love that was real. And after all the comparisons, all the hollow replacements, and all the masks they keep repainting, the narcissist is left with a truth they were never built to handle. They were the reason the best thing in their life fell apart. At first, they fight it with excuses. You changed. You became too sensitive, too demanding, too cold. They search desperately for someone to blame. But time has a way of stripping away illusions. And as the years move forward, the excuses fade, the lies lose their grip, and the truth becomes undeniable. They destroyed someone who loved them with sincere, wholehearted devotion. And that is a reality their ego will never be strong enough to bear. On Stoicism Breath, we arrive at the moment when the stories they tell themselves begin to fall apart. The lies they repeat in their mind, the excuses they give to others no longer bring comfort because deep down they know the truth. They were the one who pushed you away. Slowly, the memories start creeping back. The sadness in your eyes when you stopped believing their promises. The soft tone of your voice as you held back yet another wave of disappointment. And finally, that last moment when you turned your back to leave, not with anger, but with a sorrow so deep it could only come from the soul. That's when regret begins to take root, not as a fleeting sense of longing, but as a confrontation with guilt they've never allowed themselves to feel before. No one forced them to change. No one demanded their remorse. But in the absolute silence, with no one left to blame, no one left to control, they're left alone with themselves, staring into the void you once filled with love, loyalty, and forgiveness. And in that silence, a realization pierces through: they were wrong about you. You weren't weak for loving them. You were strong because you saw their humanity and still chose to stay until it became too heavy, too painful to continue. And now with you gone, having learned to love yourself, to heal, to move forward, what haunts them isn't loneliness. It's something far deeper, the pain of being left behind by the one person who truly knew them and still chose to love them. No one after you will be able to do that. No matter how far they search, no matter how many faces they chase, they'll only find blurred reflections, not you. At this point, they no longer crave control the way they once did. What they want now is something they can never have again, true forgiveness. But by now you've changed. You no longer cling to their approval. You no longer need them to feel whole, because their greatest betrayal taught you the most valuable lesson of all real love cannot grow from manipulation, and your worth should never rest in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to cherish it. And so they are left behind, not because of your coldness, but because of your growth, a journey they were never willing or able to take with you. And this is where the narcissist reaches the final stage. They've tried denial, they've lashed out in anger, they've sought replacements, they've played every role imaginable to hold on to a shred of control. But now when none of those tactics work anymore, they're left with the one thing they've always avoided: the truth. And that truth doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It doesn't require a final conversation or a dramatic letter. It lives in your unwavering silence, in the calmness of your eyes when you look at them like a stranger, in the steady way you keep moving forward without looking back. To a narcissist, silence isn't just emptiness. It's a sentence, not one delivered with rage or revenge, but with the complete absence of power. They can no longer define you. They can no longer label you. They can no longer control your emotions. And that undoes them in ways no one else can see, because truth has its own power. It doesn't need weapons. It doesn't need witnesses. It only needs time. On Stoicism Breath, we uncover the final consequence the narcissist can never escape. Truth doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need a stage. It only needs time. And with time, every replacement, every new relationship begins to reveal its hollowness. No one is willing to keep standing in the endless cycle of love, harm, apology, and repeat. And in that silence, the narcissist finally begins to feel the weight of their choices, a lingering emptiness that no mask can hide. At that point, they don't just grieve losing you, they grieve losing what you represented, the final chance they had to truly change. But they threw it away because they mistook your strength for fragility. They thought you would always stay, no matter how much they broke you. Instead, you became the one who loved them deeply enough to sacrifice and strong enough to walk away. And that becomes their ultimate punishment, facing their own reflection with no illusions, no applause, no admiration left to soften the truth. You were the last mirror that ever reflected their truest, most human self. And now that mirror is gone forever. But here is the part that matters most. You no longer need their apology. You don't need them to come back to knock on your door or to express remorse, because the truth has already been written and it doesn't need validation. You were the best thing that ever entered their life, and you left, not because you were weak, but because you woke up. So if you've ever been in a relationship marked by pain with a narcissist, remember this: you don't need their recognition to confirm your worth. Your decision to walk away was never a failure. It was light. It was the moment you chose to step out of darkness. You loved yourself enough to stop living inside a cycle that only drained your soul. And if today you find yourself on the path of healing, let this be your reminder: You are the most extraordinary thing they will never have again.